Hey everyone, I'm Vladimir Duthiers. Anne-Marie Green is off today. Tensions came to a fiery head on the Democratic debate stage in Charleston last night as 7 candidates made their final pitch to voters ahead of South Carolina's primary this weekend and Super Tuesday. The candidates spent the evening, which was hosted by CBS News, unloading on each other, fighting over everything from health care to the economy, foreign policy, and who can beat President Trump come November. But it was frontrunner Senator Bernie Sanders who bore the brunt of the attacks. In a CBS News poll after the debate, nearly half of viewers said they were nervous about the candidates. CBS News political correspondent Ed O'Keefe has more on the night's biggest moments.
The campaigning continues across South Carolina today, for example, at this civil rights breakfast in North Charleston. Former Vice President Joe Biden is trying to maintain his slim lead over Senator Bernie Sanders, which is why he singled out the senator a bit last night. But they weren't the only candidates who tried to get in some final blows.
But I'm not going to be quiet anymore, okay?
Often talking over each other.
Look, first of all,
Bernie, let me go.
Tom, I think she was talking about my plan, not yours.
I think we were talking about math, and it doesn't take 2 hours to do the math.
The candidates made their final arguments before the South Carolina primary and Super Tuesday.
I will win South Carolina.
From the first sentence he uttered, Senator Bernie Sanders went after former New York Mayor Michael Bloomberg.
The economy is doing really great for people like Mr. Bloomberg and other billionaires.
But it was Sanders who was the punching bag for most of the attacks.
Bernie and I agree on a lot of things, but I think I would make a better president than Bernie.
I like Bernie. We came in together to the Senate, but I do not think that this is the best person to lead the ticket.
I'm hearing my name mentioned a little bit tonight. I wonder why.
And Sanders was pressed on his recent comments to 60 Minutes about Fidel Castro.
I have opposed authoritarianism all over the world. What I said is what Barack Obama said in terms of Cuba, that Cuba made progress on education.
We're not going to win these critical House and Senate races if people in those races have to explain why the nominee of the Democratic Party is telling people to look at the bright side of the Castro regime.
Bloomberg, who will be on the ballot for the first time next week, also faced his own attacks.
And the fact that he cannot earn the trust of the core of the Democratic Party means he is the riskiest candidate standing on this stage.
All right, Senator.
I have the experience, I have the resources, and I have the record. And all of the sideshows that the senator wants to bring up have nothing to do with that.
And in a state where nearly 60% of Democratic voters are African American, issues of race were center stage.
I'm the only person on this stage who believes in reparations for slavery.
My entire life I've been involved with the black community.
We can no longer pretend that everything is race neutral.
I'm conscious of the fact that there's 7 white people on this stage talking about racial justice.
The candidates also weighed in on what they would do to stop the spread of the coronavirus.
The president fired the pandemic specialists in this country 2 years ago, so there's nobody here to figure out what the hell we should be doing.
I would better coordinate throughout my presidency to be ready for the next pandemic and to prepare for this one.
I would be on the phone with China and making it clear, we are going to need to be in your country. You have to be open. You have to be clear. We have to know what's going on. We have to be there with you and insist on it and insist.
In our CBS News snap poll of those that watched the debate last night, Senator Sanders impressed the most, followed by former Vice President Biden and Senator Elizabeth Warren. As we said, the campaigning continues across South Carolina today, but also in the coming days across the 14 states that vote on Super Tuesday.
We are joined now by CBSN political reporter Caitlin Huey-Burns, who is still in Charleston, South Carolina. So, Caitlin, as you saw last night, you were there during the debate. Senator Bernie Sanders was the focus of a lot of attacks last night. So how did he deal with it?
That's right. He heard his name a lot. That was very true. He came into this race in a position that he hadn't really been before, which was that of a frontrunner coming off a big win in Nevada, a win in New Hampshire. It was clear that he was going into last night with a target on his back. And you saw all of the candidates on stage pretty much go after him. But I don't think that this in any way really hampered his campaign, if that was the goal. That was actually the big thing that I was watching for last night heading into the debate, whether these candidates could could actually blunt the momentum coming from Bernie Sanders. And I don't think they were able to really accomplish that for two reasons. One, Bernie Sanders has shown in debate after debate after debate that he gets things back onto whatever he wants to be talking about. He is relentlessly on message, and he doesn't really apologize for anything. And so he continues to push forward. And then we saw kind of a broad variety of attacks, not a real concerted effort to focus on one thing. So I think that if you were wondering whether Bernie Sanders still has momentum going forward, I think if that was the goal of his fellow rivals to put him down a notch, I don't think that they accomplished that.
All right. So one area of focus was his controversial health care plan. What's controversial is a lot of people say he hasn't really figured out how to pay for it. And you asked him about that in a special after the debate that was hosted by Elaine Keanu and Ed O'Keefe. I want to play a bit of that for our audience.
Senator, there's been so much of the discussion focused on how you would pay for Medicare for all, but how would you actually pass it? If you look at the dissent coming from your rivals on the stage, there is not a lot of support from them for it. And also, if you look at the criticism you've received for not being able to pass much legislation in Congress,
well, that's
how do you actually do it?
How much time do you have? Yeah, I passed the most significant veterans legislation in modern history. We brought $11 billion more into primary care. 9 million people now have access to health care previously not. Passed the first time the War Powers Act to get us out of the war in Yemen. So I reject categorically that we don't have a strong record.
You know, Caitlin, this is something you and I talked about in the afternoon analysis that we were doing going into the debate, which is that even if Bernie Sanders should become the nominee for the Democratic Party and should he win an election against President Trump, how would he get these pieces of legislation through Congress, specifically if the House does not stay in Democrats' hands and the Republican-led Senate continues to be so? So what did you think of his response?
Well, he didn't really answer it. The reason that I asked is because a lot of the conversation around Medicare for All over the past several months that we've been covering this campaign has revolved around the question of how do you pay for it? Well, you can't get to how you pay for it until you can say how it will pass. I know they go together, but, you know, I've covered Congress for a while before. You've seen the dissent from the rest of the Democrats on stage really going after Bernie Sanders for how he would pay for this program. It just shows that it would be so incredibly difficult to get this actually through Congress. And that's something that I kind of wanted to get out with the senator last night. And I think that it's a question moving forward for a lot of these candidates, which is how do you actually move legislation forward in such a divided Congress and a divided Washington? Now, I think the support for Medicare for All, though, that you've seen kind of more broadly speaks to how health care is such an important issue for Democratic voters. We hear this over and over and over again, that access to care, health care costs are top of mind for voters, no matter where you are in the country. So that is something that certainly has fueled Bernie Sanders' rise. But again, I think there will still be questions about this because this is central to his pitch.
So former Vice President Joe Biden, he also criticized Bernie Sanders over his stance on gun issues after he apologized for what he called a bad vote on guns. Could his voting history be a liability for Senator Sanders?
Well, his rivals certainly hope it will, and that's why you heard Joe Biden bring that up. And that's something that Biden talks a lot about on the campaign trail in terms of his own experience passing that legislation, to say that he is the only candidate that has actually taken on the NRA and has been successful. Bernie Sanders, though, has talked about his evolution on this issue. He says he comes from Vermont and has since changed his tone over this issue as it has become something that we've seen in the public view, public opinion, and growing support for gun measures we've seen that. So I think that you'll continue to see his rivals, as they're trying to take him down, point to this. But I think, again, it was an example of how Bernie Sanders tried to get this back onto what he was wanting to talk about.
Let's stick with the former Vice President Caitlin. After falling behind in the first 3 Democratic primary contests, the former Veep is hoping for a strong finish in South Carolina and on Super Tuesday. I want to play a bit of what he told our Major Garrett about Saturday and the contest leading up to now.
I'm going to win South Carolina.
By how much?
I don't know.
Does it matter?
I think it's just important that I win. Just like
1 point is enough.
1 point is enough, but I think I can win by a lot more than that. Look, The African American community knows me, my record. They've known me for the last 40 years. I've kept my word. I've done everything I've said. They know who I am, and they know I'm not Johnny-come-lately to this.
And yet, in the first 3 contests where you competed against this entire field, you've underperformed.
Well, I haven't underperformed in terms of, let me put it this way. The first 3 contests were not contests, the first 2 contests were not contests that represented what America looks like.
Not diverse enough, in other words.
Not diverse enough. No Democrat has ever won without overwhelming black support. It's not possible to win. And being able at the same time to get working class, high school educated folks voting for you. That's the base of my support my whole career. That's one of the reasons Barack picked me to be on the ticket with him. That's why we did so well in Pennsylvania and other states. And in all those states, Bernie talks about he's leading. I'm beating them all in each of those states.
All right, Caitlin. So, again, something you and I spoke about. The former vice president has told us, his campaign has told us time and time again that South Carolina represents a firewall for them, that he, as you just heard, will win South Carolina. Was his performance last night on the debate stage enough to clinch a victory?
Well, we've talked before about how I've seen Joe Biden come to South Carolina and act kind of like a different candidate. He's much more energized. He's much more around a very supportive crowd. And it always kind of feels like a homecoming for him when he's here in South Carolina. He just wrapped up a prayer breakfast with African-American leaders right behind me and actually right next door. He's going to be endorsed by Congressman Clyburn, who, of course, is the whip of the Democratic Party, a key figure here in South Carolina, really a kingmaker in the state. He's going to endorse Joe Biden, so that could give the Joe Biden campaign a boost heading into the final days in South Carolina. He's going to be very focused on this state in the coming days because he has identified South Carolina as where his campaign really gets going, and he's put a lot at stake here. He has a lot at stake here. So he projected confidence in that interview with Major after the debate. During the debate, he said he was confident he would win the state. So we'll see what happens on Saturday, just a few days from now. But this is a really critical time for him because he has yet to prove that he is able to win.
Yeah, and I know we got to run, Caitlin, but just real quick, I mean, Major asked him is 1 point enough, and he said he just responded that he's going to win. But if he only wins by 1 point, or if he doesn't overwhelmingly win, does that still count as a win?
Well, he'll certainly count it as a win. But remember, first, this is a race for delegates. So if anybody else gets delegates here, that could kind of threaten the size of his victory if it is that close. And also, it depends on who comes in second here. If it's Bernie Sanders, who has been able to show kind of a broader coalition than some of these other candidates, given his win in Nevada, that could be a threat to the vice president.
Yeah.
Former vice president.
Yeah. I mean, I know a win is a win, but compared to where he was with voters in that state just a few months ago and compared to where he is right now versus Senator Bernie Sanders, it'll be interesting to see how it all plays out. Caitlin Huey-Burns for us still in Charleston, South Carolina. Caitlin, we appreciate it.